We're about to be joined by Jon Morosi from the MLB Network, but the other day we had Chris Young on the station with the GBag Nation stopping by for his weekly GM visit, and the fellas asked him about the Andrew McCutchen rumors.
I'll give you sort of an idea of how these things work in terms of the rumors. I saw there was a rumor out there today regarding an offensive player that, I mean, literally we've had zero contact with that team. So where that rumor came from, it really is amazing to me that those things get floated like that.
Well, look, no offense to Chris Young, but
what's he gonna say?
What are you gonna say? And I'm not taking Chris's word with as much weight after the whole deGrom thing. So it's just like teams in sports. They lie. They have to lie. So Chris Young coming out and disputing doesn't mean much to me. Great job. Appreciate the first place team. Things to talk about, but whatever. Let's bring in Jon Morosi from the MLB Network. Good morning, Jon.
Sean and RJ, good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on the show. And yes, it is. It's a fun time of year to be talking about the Rangers again, but we haven't quite had, I don't know, you would know better than me, but this much excitement about the Rangers in probably a decade.
When did you start to believe, and do you believe, that they're a championship contender?
I do believe that. As we stand right now, they may have the best chance of anybody in the American League to make it to the World Series. I really believe that. Based on the balance of their team, they can potentially add one or two more pieces at the deadline, and as we talked about, maybe it's an outfielder, maybe it's a reliever, maybe there's even additional starting depth they could pick up. But I like the balance of this team. I think that the lineup is really hard to get through, and that to me is one of the things that stands out. When you watch a Rangers game, the at-bats are impressive, and they don't all look the same. And by that I mean there are some teams that are really right-handed, and they end up, by the end of the day, getting a little bit easier to game plan against. The Blue Jays have been that kind of a team at different points in the last several years. The Rangers are not. The Rangers have a different look to them. I think throughout the lineup, it makes it really hard to get through it, and I like this team a lot. I think they are as good or better than any other team in the American League from a postseason readiness perspective.
Can you share with our audience, Jon, what you've been hearing about Andrew McCutchen?
Sure. So the McCutchen piece. So I was told that there was interest by the Rangers, and that's why when I phrased it in my initial report, I used the word broached, it was very early stages that they were interested. And right now the Pirates are candidly not interested in moving him. They at the moment, even though they are, if you look at the standings, they're clearly sellers. I think with McCutchen, they're going to wait until very close to the August 1st deadline and see what he wants to do. That's typically not something that is part of the decision-making process in a trade that you would ask the player himself if he doesn't have a no-trade clause what he wants to do. But I think that Andrew has earned that right. He came back to Pittsburgh on a one-year deal to potentially end his career where it began. And I think it's up to him at the end of the day whether he is more excited about ending his career where it begins and finish the season with the Pirates, even though they're struggling right now, or chase a ring. He's not played beyond the division series ever, and I think that he may decide that and he may. I use that word on purpose. Whatever he wants to decide by the end of July, early August is potentially going to have a pretty big impact on that club. So I do think he's on the Rangers' radar. I think that Pittsburgh's pitching is on their radar just as much, and whether it's a Mitch Keller or one of the relievers like a David Bednar, I think there's a lot of fits there to where there'd be a really nice pairing between the Pirates and the Rangers. I think eventually the Pirates will be sellers. I know they have been a great story in baseball this year. They're just not as good right now as the Reds or even the Cubs or the Brewers for that matter. So I think that there's an acknowledgement that the reality is they'll be sellers, and the question is just where, is Andrew comfortable being traded anywhere, A, and B, if he is, where? And the thing where I believe that there could be an advantage with Texas is that he knows Bruce Bochy, played for him in San Francisco. And I think Andrew is not going, if he goes anywhere, and again, I emphasize there's an if there, if he goes somewhere, I think it's going to be to a team that he knows is going to be in the dance. I don't see him, honestly, if we're talking about American League West, I think Seattle has a greater need for Andrew McCutchen right now than Texas does. But will Andrew go to a team that's right around 500 and flawed and probably won't make the playoffs? I don't think so. But I think Texas, he looks at it and says, wait a minute, I know Boch, and this team is almost certainly going to make the playoffs. There could be some appeal there. So I would say, again, the Rangers are interested on some level. How serious it gets, I think we've got about a month or so before we find that out.
What kind of player is he still at his age?
I think he's a very good right-handed side of either of a DH platoon, of a part-time outfielder. He's not an MVP right now. He might, though. I would say this: if he ends up being the Pirates' selection to the All-Star game, I would not describe that as some ceremonial tip of the cap to his career. He's earning his way there, to be honest, in terms of what he's able to do. He's not the electrifying MVP center fielder, amazing catches guy necessarily that we saw early in his career, but great leader and a really good, powerful bat. He's OPSing 832, which is one of the best numbers he's put together in about 7 or 8 years. So he's really good right now. I think he would help the Rangers a lot in the area of potentially a right-handed side to a DH platoon and or some part-time outfield. He's not going to carry the team, but the benefit of Texas right now is that they don't need him to. They've got a really, really well-constructed lineup, and that to me is the important part of this, is that he could come here and join the chorus of what this team is. I mean, so yes, would he take away at bats from Ezequiel Duran? Perhaps, but I do think he's someone that enters the clubhouse with an amazing amount of credibility. He is someone that is respected universally around the game, and if you're trying to make a push and really round out the roster and complete a group, there are not many players that I would rather have in that context than Andrew McCutchen.
Jon Morosi, MLB Insider, joining us here on 105 through the Fan. Are the Central Divisions kind of screwing up the trade market yet? Because they're just so bad that, with the exception of really the Royals, that basically everyone's still in it?
That's a great point, and I think the answer is yes. I'm actually here in St. Louis right now. We've got our showcase game broadcast tonight, the Cardinals and Astros on MLB Network, and I was talking to people yesterday from the Cardinals, and right now they would tell you, hey, we still aren't ready to trade yet. And that's a pretty interesting statement given how poorly they've played all season long. But you look at the standings and you say, okay, that's a defensible position. I don't really see them making the playoffs, but I understand that if they want to wait a while, that's plausible. Same thing with the White Sox. So there are some teams that have players who I think have good value in the market, and I mentioned a couple of them right there in the White Sox and the Cardinals, but who, for whatever reason, the team just hasn't performed this year. And I think those two teams might eventually get to the selling area, but they're not really there yet, especially not the Cardinals. So I think you're right. It's really slowed the market down a lot. I think Washington is one team that probably is ready to deal. The Royals probably at this moment would make a deal with you. I expect Detroit to be pretty aggressive. New GM in Scott Harris. They've got some pieces there too. Unfortunately, they just lost Matthew Boyd to injury here this week. So overall, I would expect there will be more sellers. But at the moment, you're spot on. There are not that many at the moment because of how close the two central divisions are.
You mentioned there that if Mitch Keller might have been a name that the Rangers would have had particular interest in with the Pirates. If they're looking for a frontline starter with the deGrom Tommy John injury, what are some of the names we're expecting, some of the top tier names you're expecting to be available as starters? Is it going to be along the lines of Mitch Keller, Dylan Cease, or could there be a bigger name out there?
Right. I do think that those are the two names, Keller and Cease, who are the controllable guys that we would be talking about the most. And honestly, those two teams, the Pirates and the White Sox, I think will have a lot of really tough decisions to make because they're going to look around. I had a GM tell me last night, John, there's just not a lot out there right now, and it's not an especially strong market in general. There's no to borrow from a 2010 conversation that we would have had about the Rangers. Cliff Lee ain't walking through that door. Okay, so there's no Cliff Lee type. I don't think at the deadline this year is going to get traded, and so I think as a result you do have to go the more controllable route. And Keller's really good. I think that in the Pirates he's got 2 more years of control after this one. And that I think would have appeal for the Rangers because, to your point, it's not just this year. They have to figure out what the rotation looks like for next year. And with Martin Perez, we're not sure what his contract will be for 2024. So if you're going to make a move, better to get somebody that you can control for 1 more year. I would not expect, even in a controllable starter situation, I would doubt highly that the Rangers would move Evan Carter for anybody, but who knows? The trade deadline is a month away. A lot can evolve between now and then, but I would be very surprised if Carter were available.
And in terms of the reliever market, the bullpen's clearly been a struggle for the Rangers much of the season. You mentioned Bednar from Pittsburgh. I assume a lot of people believe that Aroldis Chapman could get moved. Is San Diego in a spot where maybe they'd be willing to move Josh Hader at some point? Like, how do you look at the reliever market setting up?
That's a great question on Hader. I think that as we get a little bit closer, that could be a conversation. I don't think they would trade him in the next week or two, but if they really fall out of it, and honestly, goodness, they're 10.5 back now. It's been a precipitous fall for them. The same thing might be true, honestly, for the Mets. And if they fall out of it, do they trade David Robertson? Would they trade Adam Ottavino? I do think those are two teams that if I were a Ranger fan, I'd watch carefully. Mets and Padres, two of the large market teams that have disappointed. One of the things that you are always most inclined to move if you're out of it is a reliever, and I think that's where Hader and Robertson would be of relevance. I think in Detroit they've got Lang and Foley in the bullpen. Both are pretty good. It wouldn't surprise me if I think Lang or Foley might end up being the Tigers' all-star representative. They've both been really good this season. Maybe a little higher walk total for Lang, but Foley's been spot on here lately. So I think that to me is probably those are probably the big names, and I do think Detroit. I live in Michigan. I mean, I think they'll be pretty aggressive at the deadline because they're not ready to contend yet. They've had some bad luck with injuries, to be honest, where it looked like they were getting some momentum, and then Riley Green got hurt and Eduardo Rodriguez got hurt. So I think that for them, trading a reliever is probably a very likely path. And so I would pay attention to Foley and Lang if I were a Rangers fan looking at the Detroit bullpen. I know that Detroit's there this week, and then maybe they would make a move elsewhere. But I think those are the two names to watch. I think most prominently right now.
Why do you live in Michigan?
Best state in the country, my friend.
Great golf. GaylordGolfMecca.com.
Well, so here you go. So you got to your point, great golf up north, beautiful weather. Obviously, the winter time is tough, but I'm a pond hockey skating family. I'm from the north, so I mean we love to be outside, love the snow, and I believe I got to double check on this. I think we've got a Michigan versus Texas series coming up in football pretty soon, the next few years, right?
I think it's like starts at like 25 or 26, something like that.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll tell you this quick story since you brought it up. The one game that I ever did. I've only done one game as a college football sideline reporter, one game, and that was in the fall of 2018 in Lubbock when the Longhorns beat Texas Tech. Ellinger had an amazing game, and that was the one football game I did on the sideline, and it was an amazing experience. Loved it. Great.
Wow. Jon Morosi, MLB Insider, join us here 105 through the Fan. What is the talk around the sport about deGrom and what they think his future is after the recovery and he comes back from his second Tommy John?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that sadly, when the injury happened, I'll say this, and just like looking at this statistical record, it was not a circumstance in which there was profound surprise from the industry that he was hurt or that he had to have surgery. I think that we just saw the diminishing number of innings he was pitching. The Rangers took a gigantic gamble when they signed him, and they knew it was a gamble. I think any casual look at how many innings he had pitched would tell you it was a gamble, and they lost a year. Now, all is not lost here. If you look at how long a Tommy John surgery can be successful for, maybe he gets one that fortifies everything, and he's right back to being his dominant self from 4 or 5 years ago for the next 6 or 7 seasons. I mean, that's one of those things that we don't know. The human body is such a fascinating thing to study in a sports science context, and we're not sure what to expect. But I think you can look at it one of two ways. Either this confirms the uncertainty and the questions that everybody had for a long time, or this explains the injuries he dealt with in 21 and 22, and now he's going to be good to go. I think it's, for me, part of the deGrom signing was that it was sort of one aspect of this 2-year plan to infuse this roster with a ton of high-level talent. And by and large, the strategy is working. Obviously, it's the first year of deGrom as a swing and a miss, but that's part of the risk of doing this. You look at elsewhere, Eovaldi has been a success. Semien, what a year he's having. Seager, same thing this season. So I think there's this is one of those things where, especially in baseball, because of the injuries, you can't expect that you're going to hit on every single big dollar contract. And this really comes down to the appetite for risk on the part of the ownership group. And while it's frustrating for a Ranger fan this year, I'm sure, I would say this: being grateful that your ownership group is willing to take a big swing is probably a good attitude to take right now, because there's a lot of teams would not have even contemplated the deGrom deal, and your owners did, and good on them for it.
John, last one. You got to buy a ticket. You get to buy a ticket for one. You could see Shohei or Elly De La Cruz. Which one are you going to buy?
Shohei, still. There's just that Elly is elite, and I think will be elite for a long time, and is amazing right now, and I think will be amazing. But the things like Shohei's doing last night, just no one's done it before. Not even like the Babe Ruth was quoted as saying that doing this is impossible. 100 years ago, he basically said, you can't do both. You cannot. It is not possible. The Babe was wrong. And we're watching the Babe be proven wrong every week. And I am of the mind that we should not take a second of this for granted. We are seeing something. I compare this, and I know he's a division opponent for Texas, but like I grew up in Michigan. I was watching the Pistons play against the Jordan Bulls during those years. You still had to appreciate what you were watching, the greatest. And that's how I hope that all baseball fans feel about watching Shohei right now.
Hey, man, this was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, and continue to enjoy the square pizza there. I think that's y'all's thing.
There you go. Hey, my pleasure. I look forward to it. And again, we got to check that calendar. Whenever the Longhorns and Wolverines meet up, I think it's time for me to get down to Texas for some football again, and we'll look forward to catching up then.
September 7th, 2024. That's the day.
Mark, and there you go. That's coming up, guys, a year from now.
Thank you, John.
Calendars, guys.
Appreciate you, man.
All the best. Thank you so much.